focus in on exactly why voter enthusiasm may be down among African Americans. With me now, Rebecca Berg. She's a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Jason Johnson is politics editor for TheRoot.com and political science professor and Sirius XM contributor. And Andy Smith is the director of the University of New Hampshire Survey Center. Welcome to all of you.
Good morning.
Thanks, Carol.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So Jason, let's zero in on North Carolina, shall we? The NAACP in North Carolina filed a lawsuit Monday over black voter suppression. A federal appeals court accused Republicans of an almost surgical assault on black turnout. According to the New York Times, black voters had only one polling place to cast a ballot in Guilford County, North Carolina. In 2012, there were 16 locations.
Right.
So is Mr. Trump right? Is the election rigged?
Yeah, Donald Trump is right. It's rigged in favor of Republicans in certain states. You have a clearly racially targeted plan of voter suppression going on in North Carolina, going on in Ohio, and going on in Pennsylvania. That's one of the reasons why the Clinton campaign has been spending so much time there. But I think the important thing to remember is this, Carol, when we look at these numbers of Hispanic turnout, African-American turnout, white turnout, Hillary Clinton is going to do better with white voters than Barack Obama did. Barack Obama only got 38% of the white vote and managed to get reelected in 2012. Hillary Clinton is going to do much, much better with white voters. There's huge Latino turnout. So I think this idea of focusing on black turnout being the difference, it may be lower for Democrats, but it's going to be made up for by a higher turnout amongst white women and certainly higher turnout amongst Latinos.
Rebecca, do you agree?
I do agree that we are seeing some jump among Latinos, and certainly we've seen college-educated white voters in particular favoring Hillary Clinton. And that's key because this is a group that traditionally in recent presidential elections has supported Republicans. And so Trump has been forced to compensate with support from working class white voters, which he has done to a large extent. But this, make no mistake, this is a major problem for Hillary Clinton. And it's one of the reasons that to try to energize African American voters, you have seen President Obama, Michelle Obama out on the campaign trail. It's why we're seeing President Obama going to North Carolina today to try to make the case for these voters to get out early and to make their voices heard. I think Democrats anticipated that this would be a problem, but the extent of the problem is really going to be the determining factor as to whether Hillary Clinton can win in some of these key states.
So Andy, you're the polling expert. What can we really read from these early voting numbers?
Well, actually not a lot. There doesn't seem to be too much correlation between the early voting numbers and what the actual vote will be. Because if you think about voting, either early voting or late voting, the biggest factor is determining if you have that much interest in politics or going to vote at all. And actually, even voting on Election Day isn't that difficult. And we've not seen that voting turnout has gone up appreciably, even though we've made it easier to vote in many states. So you're either going to vote or you're not going to vote. When you do it isn't the critical factor. But I think that one of the issues that I would say to pay attention to is that African American turnout, because both in 2008 and 2012, African Americans across the country turned out at higher rates than did whites. And if their numbers should drop, say, 2 percentage points or 3 percentage points in states like Ohio or Pennsylvania, that would be enough, if, assuming everything else stays the same, to throw those states to Donald Trump. So it is a concern for the Clinton campaign, and I think that's why you're seeing so much focus on African American votes in those key battleground states.
Okay, so let's talk about Republican voters. Mike Pence is urging Republicans to, quote, come home. Yet George P. Bush, who's Jeb Bush's son, says he is the only Bush voting for Trump, which means George W. Bush could actually vote for Hillary Clinton. So we also know that John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, he wrote in McCain. We know the Massachusetts Republican governor says he's not voting for Trump or Clinton. So is there any sign, Jason, that Republicans are coming home?
Well, I think you've got good news and bad news if you're a Republican voter. The quote-unquote tightening, and it's really not tightening in the race, what we're seeing is Trump's numbers are creeping up a bit because you've got Republicans who are on the fence who are deciding that they are going to vote for him. The problem is that that Republican voter is still very apprehensive about his campaign. A lot of them are manifesting themselves in Gary Johnson voters, depending on the state. A lot of them are still claiming they're undecided voters. The fact that you have so many high-profile Republicans who are saying, look, I'm not going to vote for this guy, that is reflective of many people on the ground. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Trump campaign is still desperately campaigning in places like Arizona, where they shouldn't have to go, because there are Republicans who are still not going to vote for him, and they may be voting for Clinton.
So, Rebecca, what about this notion that there are a bunch of secret Trump supporters out there that are very eager to vote for him? Have we seen any real signs that that's true?
Well, so this theory, Carol, is that in polling, people aren't necessarily forthcoming with their support for Donald Trump. So far, I haven't seen any indication that that is the case. Certainly, there are voters out there who are not enthusiastic about either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, and I think that's reflected in the unfavorable ratings for both of these candidates, which are historic, two of the most unpopular candidates who have ever run for president, if not the most unpopular. And so certainly there are some people that are not going to be excited if they do end up making a choice and are currently undecided about the person they end up supporting. But I don't think that there is any sort of pronounced reflection in polling of people who are just not wanting to admit that they're supporting Donald Trump. There's actually a precedent we can look at, which is the Senate race a few years ago between Claire McCaskill and Todd Akin in Missouri. Todd Akin made his very controversial remark about legitimate rape that basically torpedoed his chances in that race. But many Republicans tried to argue at the time that there were these hidden voters, people who were afraid to say that they were supporting him, but actually did. And when it came to Election Day, Claire McCaskill won by a ton, and those voters never materialized.
So, Andy, you know, a lot of people say they won't vote this year because the choices are bad. But again, a lot of people are talking about this election, and they're talking about it a lot. Everywhere I go, people want to talk about this. So it doesn't really wash with me that on one hand, you have people really involved in politics there, and on the other hand, it's like, well, I'm just not going to vote. It just, like, what can we read from that?
Well, I think that Rebecca is right. These are the two most unpopular candidates that we've seen since the advent of modern political polling. And I was just looking at the ABC News tracking poll, and one of the fascinating things there is how less enthusiastic both parties are than they were even 4 years ago. Democrats are about 20 percentage points less enthusiastic, or excuse me, Clinton supporters versus Obama supporters are about 20% less enthusiastic, and Romney supporters versus Trump supporters are about 10% less enthusiastic. So I don't think that voters are really seeing a positive choice here, and I think that's reflected in both candidates' closing remarks, and they're both going negative still, because if you've got high negatives, the only thing you can really do is drive your opponent's negatives even higher, and I think that's what we're seeing, unfortunately, over the last weekend here.
I know, at least we have consistency, though, right? It started out ugly, and it's going to end ugly, too. Thanks to all of you for being with me this morning. Rebecca Berg, Jason Johnson, Andy Smith, many thanks.